May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Please be seated. I had the last 3 weeks off from preaching on Sunday morning, and I have to say it was a really nice break. It's the longest stretch of not preaching that I've had since I was ordained. But by last weekend, I was feeling a little antsy and ready to be back in the pulpit, and so I got to the office this week and opened up the lectionary and read, and Jesus said, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple." And I just threw up my hands. There Jesus is again, saying really un-Jesus-like things, which he does actually fairly often if you read the Gospels carefully. He says things that really just don't sound like they should come from his mouth. Jesus has been traveling around the countryside, preaching and healing people and talking to folks. He's been followed by his disciples, that group of 12 people that are closest to him, those names that we know, Peter, James, and John. And as he travels around, these big crowds gather around to get a glimpse of him. They've heard something about him. Maybe they've heard about his healing people who are sick, and they want to see if that really does happen, if he can really do that. Maybe they've heard about some of the things he preaches about how the poor are going to be lifted up and the rich are going to be overthrown. And they want to see if actually he does say those things. Maybe they've heard that he talks about eternal life, and they want to see if that is something that maybe they could have for themselves. For whatever reason, they've come out to get a glimpse of him. These big crowds gather around him, and Jesus knows that they're there just to check him out, but he wants to kind of get their attention. And so I think he says this really shocking thing about people who want to become his disciples can't do that unless they hate their mother and father, their sisters and brothers, their family. He says that because he suspects that in that group of people who are following him around, even the folks who are following him from place to place, we're not just there to check him out once or twice, he suspects that there's a lot of folks there who spend a little time following him around and then go back to their lives, absolutely unchanged from what they've heard. Go back to living the way they have been their whole life. And he wants to get their attention and shock them out of the way they've been doing things. So one of the questions I have about this passage for us today is, where do we see ourselves in that crowd? Are we in that inner circle of disciples who spend a lot of time with Jesus? Are we just on the outskirts of the crowd, kind of wanting to get a glimpse of him? Or are we kind of in the middle, trying to figure out what this means for our lives? As I was studying this passage this week, I thought about whether discipleship is really for everyone. And Jesus seems to imply here that maybe it's not for absolutely everybody. Maybe the discipleship, real discipleship, is for the few. And does that make us, the rest of us, then sort of, if you will, amateur Christians? And I don't mean that in a pejorative or a negative sense, that word amateur. Rather, I mean it in the original sense of the word. It's from the French, and it means lover of. It's not a negative connotation to be an amateur. When I was 5 years old, my mother found a woman in the neighborhood who taught piano lessons and sent me off to go take piano lessons. She did that like thousands of other parents do because she thought it would be a good idea, something good for me, and also because she, when she was a girl, wished that she had taken piano lessons, and so she wanted me to have an opportunity that she didn't have. My parents never expected in a million years that I would decide that I wanted to be a concert pianist. In fact, we had many arguments about that in high school and college. Ultimately, I did not become a concert pianist, but I did become a professional musician for about 15 years until I discerned a call to ministry. And now I am once again an amateur musician. I love playing music. I get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I get a lot of fulfillment out of it. I'm no longer being paid to do it. There's nothing wrong with being an amateur Christian, with loving God, with loving Jesus. But I think part of what Jesus is doing in this passage this morning is inviting us to consider where we are in the crowd and how we might go a little deeper in our relationship with Jesus. A good question for us to ponder. Later on in the passage, Jesus says another hard thing. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions. It's hard for me to picture him saying this to the crowd that was following him. Because the reality is, folks, 99.999% of people who lived in first century Palestine during Jesus' time were beyond dirt poor. They were poor at a level that we can't even begin to imagine. These are not people who had a lot of possessions. These are folks who were mostly subsistence farmers. They were struggling to grow enough to be able to put food on the table for their families. Starvation was a real issue. When Jesus says you have to give up your possessions in order to follow me, these are not people who are living in big houses with 2 cars in the garage and with a basement full of everything that they've accumulated in their life. They have nothing to give up. I think Jesus is inviting the crowd, and he's inviting you and I to consider what it is that we are holding on to that is keeping us from going deeper in our relationship with Jesus. Some of that stuff, some of those things may be stuff. We had a great rummage sale in here this weekend. A lot of us kind of cleared out our basement, brought our things over here so that other people could enjoy our possessions going forward. And if you were anything like me, I felt a lot lighter getting all that stuff out of my basement and feel like I'm going through life with a little less kind of stuff to haul around. Some of the stuff that we haul around that keeps us from going deeper with Jesus, though, aren't things. There's things like our petty jealousies, our tendency to try and kind of put people in a box based on their race or based on some other characteristic. Our stereotypes, our prejudices, our hatreds, the things that we nurture and hold on to, even though we know they're not good for us, and they're not making us feel any better, but we somehow just can't let go of them. Our negative self-images of ourselves that we picked up at some point in our life that keep us from being able to see that we are made in God's image, that we are children of God. All of those things that keep us from being our best selves. So another question that I think this passage asks us to consider is what is it that you and I are hanging on to that is keeping us from a deeper relationship with God? Finally, as I said, I think that discipleship, as Jesus talks about in this passage, may not be for everybody, but this passage invites us to go deeper in our relationship with God. Being a Christian is not about an hour on Sunday morning. It is about what we do with our lives the rest of the week, how we shape our lives when we leave this place. We come here for some support, for some deeper understanding, for some energy, for some comfort, and then we live out our lives as Christians out in the world. The question this passage asks us is how we can deepen our relationship with God, how we can be better disciples of God, how we can deepen our faith, how we can learn to love God and our neighbor more. I hope this week that you'll spend a few minutes reflecting on your relationship with God, your relationship with Jesus, how you are a disciple in whatever way that looks like for you, how you are Jesus' disciple, and how you can deepen your relationship with God. I think these are good questions for us to reflect on as we begin a new program year. We have the Sunday school back, we've got our choir back. As we begin this new year, reflect on how we can be better disciples of Jesus. Amen.